Okay, welcome to the SumerSports Show, Saturday edition. We had great numbers last week, so we're going to do it again. I know we're a little bit late today relative to last week, and we're in the middle of March Madness. We're going to go right up against it. You can only play against the best competition, and that's what I'm being told. I'm being told that strength of schedule matters. I'm being told that strength of victory matters. So we're putting this podcast up against this Gonzaga Kansas game right now here during the March Madness, the NCAA tournament. I'm with Ben Brown, data scientist extraordinaire. Ben, how has been your Saturday morning? How has been your week since we last chatted on this show?
Yeah, I think, obviously, we're football guys first and foremost, but as far as betting and all the activities, I think March Madness is very much the one event that can at least live up to the hype from like a betting and gambling perspective as like the Super Bowl. And I'm not quite sure. I do think the Super Bowl, just because I love football so much, it stands the test of time as like the epitome of gambling and sports degeneracy. But I do think March Madness is a close second. So for me, obviously riding the high in a lot of scenarios, have a couple brackets. I know people get into the Kokadas, the Survivor knockout type things. Like there's just a ton of like really fun activity. And there's been, a couple decent games, I would say, as well. But kind of like you said, I think we timed it a little bit well with, the Saturday edition. I think the March Madness for me is very much Thursday, Friday, back-to-back multiple games running. Kind of once it gets into this a little bit of a break, it just doesn't quite have the same as appeal as I would say as like the first 2 days of the madness.
I agree with you 100%. The first 2 days of the tournament for me are it, like where there's just games back to back. It's if I were to even go, like, let's say, you were going to Vegas and you were betting on the games and everything like that again. And you were going to go to like Stadium Swim. We're going to plug Circa, who was a sponsor of the show, probably will be again for the Circa Millions and Survivor contest this fall. You go to Circa, you go to Stadium Swim, probably the best sports viewing spectacle in the world. I don't know, Ben, if I have even like the patience, if I have the even the patience to sit in Stadium Swim and watch anything other than NFL Red Zone,
right?
The 1 o'clock hour, the 4 o'clock hour might be even a little bit of a drag, and then March Madness past the first 2 days, because as you said, it goes from the games kind of happening together to now you kind of have a random NIT game going with a sort of like a game that matters and all this. And I don't know, like and I don't like college basketball enough to really like sit down and watch it. Like I watched my Nebraska Cornhuskers last night. Again, they have never won an NCAA tournament game. That streak remains. So I don't know. Like I love March Madness, but I like today because I have some work I have to do, and then I get to watch these games kind of intermittently on the background. Like as you know, when there's work to do on an NFL Sunday, might as well not get it done because there's just so much. There's not enough commercial breaks during the course of there's no commercial breaks for the NFL for the Red Zone product, and so you just don't get that time. At least today you'll get some time to sort of think in between dead balls and things like that.
Yeah, the work never ends is basically what Eric's describing as. And Eric's like the best multitasker I think I've ever come across in my entire life as well. So he can coordinate and do 4 different things. For me, I'm with you, but like I can kind of have a game on in the background, but I feel like I miss so much doing other work. So it's a tough get. But I do think we both agree that it very much ranks from like a sports betting perspective. Super Bowl, then March Madness, then like the rest of the events, I would say. So.
Yeah, well, we thank everybody who's come, the normal people, Beat Gamer, Sean Donahoe, Alex Hussey, some of our common listeners here that have been here the whole time. Look, I'm going to go against Hayden Wink's like random tweet the other day of Underdog, obviously an analyst we all like, who said that you're not supposed to talk about things other than the absolute very narrow thing that the podcast is about. I think that that's bullshit. You can talk about your life on a podcast, but we will move on to what the very nature of this show is, which is the NFL. Last night, we didn't have a ton of news this week, right? We simply Justin Fields was traded last week, right after this show, for a 6th-round pick. I look at that trade, and I talked about this with Tay Seth on this show Monday. To me, that's a very much a trading of the contracts and trading of the sides of the risk, where the side of the risk, and I already talked about this, is if he sucks, that's obviously you wasted capital. If he's pretty good, then you have to buy in when you're not necessarily sure you want to buy in. And even though they're not related directly, I think L'Jarius Sneed situation being traded today or yesterday for a 2025, so next year, 3rd-round pick and a swap of 7ths, which is basically no value at all. I think that illustrates what we're talking about, Ben, right? L'Jarius Sneed's a guy who drafted 4th-round pick, a safety out of Louisiana Tech, became a corner in the Chiefs Super Bowl season of 2020, 2021. In fact, in the AFC Championship game, he got an interception, but the other 9 or 10 plays into his coverage were all caught against the Bengals that day. And then 2022 is pretty good, but he gets hurt in the AFC Championship game. They win that game against the Bengals without him. And then this past season, unequivocally, a top 5 corner in all of football production-wise, shutting down players, playing inside and outside. But the fact is L'Jarius Sneed's kind of that guy where he overplayed his fundamentals so dramatically that a team like the Chiefs is sitting here with this asset, and the whole league is kind of wise to a few things, right? The well-reported issues with his knee, the fact that he doesn't have a lot of draft capital, meaning most of these general managers were not all that high on him coming out. And it's funny, but you look at all the models, as our former intern at PFF, Arjun Menon, says, you put age and draft status in every single model.
Right.
The Chiefs are holding on to an asset that I think the fans of the Kansas City Chiefs, through no fault of their own, think is much more valuable than the rest of the league does. And so when this trade happens, everybody acts like the Kansas City Chiefs got fleeced. And it's not a great return, but I think it's the best return they could have gotten, Ben. What do you think about this particular swap between the Chiefs and the Titans?
Yeah, I think overall the interesting thing to me, and I think it's maybe a separation of where fundamental analysts differ from just fans that are specific to one team, but it always seems like in these sort of situations, the player being moved is always traded for much less on the dollar than what the assumed fan is actually agreeing with for what that player is actually valued from a trade compensation standpoint with the draft pick. So to me, I does seem like it was probably the best offer that the Chiefs would have potentially gotten. To your point, very much age and draft capital matter. And I think the third, with Sneed obviously buying into a position that has been historically somewhat unstable and is a weak link type system, I'm not surprised that the Chiefs did the move that they actually did. And I think in a lot of ways, I agree with the trade compensation. I think overall, I think there's just a fundamental gap. And in some ways I fall victim to it too, with what, with where, even a guy like Justin Fields was valued at and what I would have given up from a Vikings, fan perspective. But to me, I think overall, we just don't see high-end players, traded for really significant assets at any point in time. And I think that, it's always going to be an undervalued spot where fans are just going to overvalue those players for sure.
Yeah, I think if you just spelled out the math, I mean, here's the thing, if L'Jarius Sneed played a career average season last year, the Chiefs' MO would have been to just let him walk.
Right.
And they would have gotten something in the comp pick formula. By the way, if somebody tries to tell me they would have for sure gotten a 3rd-round comp pick, I'm going to blow my brains out, because that's not how it works, right? Because they go and sign a Jawan Taylor, they go and sign a Sammy Watkins, they go and sign a Joe Thuney. It never works that way, folks. But if the MO would have been to let him walk for nothing and be a part of the comp pick formula and all this. The fact of the matter is, what made this tough is L'Jarius Sneed played above and beyond. But you and I are both, recovering, we were, sports bettors, and obviously we gamble on other things. And when you're at the table and you've gotten a bunch of nice run good type of plays, and
only
You
going to
just like,
continue.
not to push it, right? And I think that that's like the Chiefs knew that they got really good play out of L'Jarius Sneed. By the way, L'Jarius Sneed missed a bunch of time in training camp for the very knee that everybody's talking about.
No.
And so you get a bunch of run good here, and you let him walk. Effectively, you let him walk here, and now you get a for sure third round pick for it, as opposed to it going in the formula. And even if you got the highest comp pick available for Sneed, which is like the 90th pick, you're still probably getting 20 picks ahead of that on average. So it is a good return relative to what you expected. And so that's what L'Jarius Sneed got you. I think the fact is like, let's just do the math, because people are like, well, why don't you just keep Sneed? Like, why don't you? Well, keeping Sneed comes at a cost, boys. Like, the fact is, if you keep Sneed, then Sneed, so you keep Sneed. Let's do the math. Sneed, then, for him to be worth more than what you just got in this trade, like a third round pick, and let's be round, over the next 4 years, that third round pick is going to be worth anywhere from 5 to 15 million in surplus value. I don't check me on this. I got to look back at the actual chart. But like, let's say that. So this one, if all the folks are saying, oh, let him go and then get a comp pick, L'Jarius Sneed has to be worth more than that, more than 20 million on the field in comparison to that one pick. So he's got to be worth like 30 million on the field. Again, assuming you don't get a comp pick in return, he's got to be worth above that on the field. So he's got to stay healthy. He's got to produce at a $30 million level, which no cornerback does.
Right. And yeah, and obviously, like, he was, this was by far his best season, but in some ways banking on that consistency as well. It's just like an astronomical roll of the dice that doesn't seem wise or shrewd from like any sort of franchise. So it does make a ton of sense, right? So,
and the opportunity cost, of course, is in 2025 free agency. You can't go after an actual free agent because you need that third round comp pick to sort of justify what you're doing. But then also in 2000, like, think about the Chiefs in 2023. Some of their best signings this past year were Mike Edwards, who was a free agent safety, a 1-year deal for modest amounts of money. He ended up starting for Brian Cook when Brian Cook got injured. He had interceptions in the playoffs. He made huge plays all year. He was a big-time part of this team. Charles Omenihu was another guy who they signed for a 2-year, $11 million deal. He had a big strip sack of Lamar Jackson in the playoffs and was a plus player after he came back from suspension. They had a number of different, like, sort of very small deals that add up to that $20 million that you're going to pay Sneed, and shit happens in the NFL, right? That's why you have to be able to actually, like, you can't just consolidate. And the problem is they already are consolidating a great deal of their risk in Chris Jones, in Travis Kelce, and of course, Patrick Mahomes. And so they just could not do this. They could not even do this for 1 year. And I think that that's the thing that's gone missing, I think, in a lot of people's understanding of this very deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think you obviously like drilled the point. And I do think, to the Chiefs' perspective, obviously, like, the flexibility that they have and not extending or not doing anything with Sneed, I think opens up some more opportunities to the point where the third round compensation, like you said, just makes a ton of sense for what they're trying to build, both short and long term. And it'll be interesting to see how they actually approach the draft. But, I do think they are better long term. And that doesn't really seem to be like a popular refrain coming out of this trade, I would say, right now.
Yeah. And again, it's not that, I mean, you just can't keep all your great players. And so that's a big deal. And again, 1 year a delay in a pick is generally speaking worth about a round. And so not only that, but like, it's also the difference between a third round pick and a fourth round pick if you put it on the same scale as this year. So I'm not trying to be a Brett Veach Bobo here, but I'm also just saying, like, Brett Veach has hit a lot of balls out of the park. He started this at bat at 0-2 because of just all and I wouldn't even say unlucky. It was lucky that L'Jarius Sneed gave the Chiefs 2 Super Bowl caliber seasons at corner. It's just that from the perspective of moving on from him, it wasn't going to make a ton of sense. Now, let's talk about this from the Titans' perspective, because Ben, last week, one person on this show said that the Tennessee Titans at +1, I think it was 150-1, were or actually we talked the AFC. 151 was their Super Bowl price. AFC was more like what, 60 to 1 or so. I said that the AFC, I thought that the Tennessee Titans were a value in the AFC. Let's go ahead, and this thing has not moved, which is really interesting. Also, maybe a little bit of ammunition for the people who want to sort of think the way that we do about the actual value of some of these players. But let's go ahead and look at the AFC odds as they currently stand. The Kansas City Chiefs are the favorites coming out of the AFC at 7-2. The Ravens are right around 9-2, Ben. Yeah, the Bills are 13-2. Bengals are 7-1. Houston, I think the team we're all planting our flag on, 11-1. Miami 13-1, and then it goes all the way down. The long shots again are going to be the Vegas Raiders at 40-1, the Tennessee Titans, who just acquired Sneed, at 60-1, the Denver Broncos at 70-1, New England Patriots at 90-1. Does this trade at all affect, and Beat Gamer has a very good point here, but I do want to make a point about without Vrabel coaching. Does this trade move you at all as far as thinking that any of these prices are inaccurate?
Yeah, I mean, and you did mention the Titans last week. I think they're 90-1 actually on DraftKings, but to me, they are a team that at least seems like they are trying to compete in the AFC South sooner rather than later, right? And I think that's very much reflective of what they've done in both free agency, this trade. It sounds like they're, obviously you and I can question what Will Levis is going to become, but it does seem like within that building, like there's buy-in almost immediately. And I do think that in some ways that at least could provide some value. So I think more at 90-1, the Titans maybe are worth a little sprinkle. I think they're like the Texans as well are kind of 12-1 on DraftKings. So maybe those are still kind of the two spots. I don't think any other news or information really moves me hardcore in one direction. The Steelers quarterback situation with Justin Fields now, does that do anything for you as far as your analysis of where the Steelers are going to finish in both the AFC North or AFC at large? I mean, it's just who do you think starting week 1 for Pittsburgh, and who do you think starting week 18 for Pittsburgh?
That's a great question. I think that Russell Wilson is starting week 1. And I think Russell Wilson is starting week 18. And and I do think that Justin Fields starts some of the intermediate games.
Right.
But Justin Fields has never stayed healthy for a whole season. He's never performed well for a whole season. I think in a rational world, he's who the Steelers play at quarterback because he's got more potential. He helps you win more often as far as running the football, and I think as a passer, he and Russ are not all that much different in the sense that they're both bad. So I think that gives them the best chance to win. I think Russ is going to start right away because Tomlin, that's kind of what Tomlin wants. And then I think that you're going to probably see Russ either get hurt or go to the bench when things invariably go wrong. The contract makes it a lot easier, Ben, for him to go to the bench because you don't have all that much invested in him. And then I think Fields ultimately either plays his way out of it or is injured and Russell finishes the season. When I think about the Steelers, though, Deontay Johnson, that's a big loss for them. I don't think Pickens is kind of the player that you want to be the only good wide receiver on your team. And then offensive line got better. So that's where I like Fields because they ran the football, as we know with our fantasy teams at Sumer. The Najee Harris was phenomenal in the second half of last year relative to where he was in the beginning, and it was almost all a product of the blocking. And I think on the defensive side of the ball, you have Alex Highsmith, you have TJ Watt. The linebacking core is always going to be kind of a problem. And then in the secondary, they got rid of Patrick Peterson. I think that they're going to be always a little bit mid back there, but they've always overcome those things because of Mike Tomlin. So I think the AFC North, you're going to probably see a step back from Baltimore.
Agreed.
It's hard to fade Baltimore because they're so smart and they do so many good things, but there's a lot of people that left that team, both coaching, front office, and players. I think Cincinnati has made a lot of smart moves, and they should, in a way, be the favorite going into the season. Even if the market doesn't say so. And then I think Cleveland, with Jerry Jeudy coming in. I know that price tag, and we'll talk about that because that was a signing that just happened. I think that they're a threat. So I just don't know where Pittsburgh finds its way in this division.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with you. I still very much think they're fourth of four teams. I do think, week 1, Russ, week 18, Russ does make a lot of sense. It does seem like a Tomlin situation. But yeah, so let's talk about the Browns because, I think Beat Gamer brought them up, liking them. We talked a little bit about them last week. Like, what do you make of the Jerry Jeudy situation? Obviously, like the Browns have some MO of going out and getting a little bit of like a disgruntled receiver or really any player through the trade, through a trade acquisition because of what they did with Deshaun Watson. But the contract afterwards and everything else, like what exactly is the direction of the Cleveland Browns right now? And is it something that makes you more or less bullish on them?
Well, I think Cleveland is in a position, and let's go ahead and actually like pull up their Over the Cap page because Over the Cap does such a great job with this. I want to give Jason Fitzgerald, who is one of my favorite analysts in the whole world. Let's go ahead and look at their cap page. Notice here one very interesting thing about what Cleveland does, right? For most of their players, it's either going to be these huge base salaries, these huge paragraph 5, so that far left column next to the player's name. So Watson, Cooper, Nick Chubb to a lesser extent. Conklin's less so, but he's still there. And then everybody else who's in that top, 12 players for them is all a minimum salary player from a base salary standpoint. Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, David Njoku, Dalvin Tomlinson, Darius Smith, Jedrick Wills. They're all sort of minimum salary players, and then they get they prorate a signing bonus. And so that team, for better or worse, and you look over on the right-hand side of the salary cap table, they can't cut any of those players as a result because, and including Watson, because ultimately the dead money that they would take on from prorating all that money in the future, all that money gets shoved into, in the case of it's pre-June 1, all that money gets shoved and accelerated into this year as dead money. Cleveland's ownership is content continuing to kick the can down the road. And as Jack Duffin and our colleague Uda Ranazari, who worked for the Cleveland for a year, have said, when your ownership is willing to pay above and beyond the cap in cash and prorate, the contracts become less and less of a mistake, right? Deshaun Watson's contract is an albatross for this team, but they're still able to win because they're able to take that $46 million base salary that you guys all see, convert it to a bonus, add some void years. And when that happens, you can shave off about $40 million in terms of that cap hit every time. And as long as you're willing to buy now and pay later, which they are, you can certainly fit that there. I think with Jeudy, I think the big issue is always going to be that just struggles catching the ball. Yeah. And there's another guy on this team, right, Amari Cooper, who has at times struggled to catch the ball. The one difference is Jeudy, per Matt Harmon's research, has always done well against man coverage. He's done poorly against zone. All the data suggests that zone beating is way less stable than man beating. So Cleveland's, hoping for that. Cooper can get open against anything. And so I think Jeudy is like firmly the number 2 here. And so is $17 to $20 million, depending upon what report you end up believing in the up to number. Does that move you as far as a number 2 receiver in an offense where you're not quite sure the quarterback can actually take advantage of it?
Yeah, I mean, that is very much the question. I do think, to me, it seems, especially when you're looking at like contract rates, like you're looking in a similar vein as like Deontay Johnson in a way now, with Carolina Panthers based, I think he's at like 18.3 a year sort of thing. That range to me, based on, what we believe about Jerry Jeudy, I think is in some ways high, but obviously very different skill sets between those types of receivers. So I'm inclined to kind of agree with the fact that you do maybe see slightly more gaudy numbers with the Browns, kind of like you said, because of the kicking and deferred amount in void in years and being able to kind of like pay up in this particular year. So I don't know. I do think based on where they're at with Deshaun Watson's contract, like they still very much have to try to win now. And I like the idea. I like the approach of at least surrounding him with weapons, because I do think, David Njoku as well very much kind of coming off a career year. They do have the pieces around Watson to the point where they should be successful. So,
well, it's important to point out Njoku. When Njoku signed his extension in the spring of 2022, I wrote an article because Njoku is the last first-round tight end to have success with his team. Yeah. And it didn't happen until the second contract. Cleveland does have a very good scouting staff, a very good analytics staff. They collect data that other teams don't do. And I do trust them in some ways more than I would on others when it comes to player evaluation. Now, the Watson thing's in their face, but no team is going to bat 1,000 on player evaluation, to your point. So I don't find the Jeudy signing as offensive. I just think that because of Cleveland, if another team would have done this exact same deal, I would question it because there's a track record with Cleveland when they buy into players, generally speaking, especially like I said, Watson notwithstanding, they generally speaking are pretty good. Ben, I do have to update the crowd here. Kansas with just under 10 minutes left in the first half, 22-18 over Gonzaga.
So the injury doesn't matter.
A 4-point favorite at close, currently struggling not only to cover here but to win outright in the second round of the tournament as a 5 seed against the 4-seeded Kansas. Okay. Let's talk now about what we believe about the NFL draft because we have seen the markets move a little bit. And so as we close here for today, let's take a gander back to our favorite because we have seen actual movement in this marketplace with the first pick. We have seen movement with the second and third pick as well. And with your and the team of my youth, the Minnesota Vikings, we have seen some movement with the fourth pick as well. Caleb Williams is now minus 5,000 to be the first overall pick. One thing, and maybe you can expound upon this a little bit, one thing that my friend Rob Pizzola was talking about briefly with this as a plus EV move on his podcast, Circles Off, which in my opinion is the best betting. It's like the Joe Rogan experience of betting podcasts in all the good ways. He says that in these markets where there's a big favorite, they almost de-vig the favorite, in meaning like Daniels, May, Harrison, McCarthy, Penix at 25-1, 30-1, 60-1, 100-1, 150-1 respectively. Like that's where all the over-round is happening, which is an interesting thought process when you're thinking about whether or not to bet. Rob says he almost always lays the favorite with the first overall pick with a bet at the very end of the draft, which is an interesting approach, I would say. What do you think about that? Actually, I want to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I feel like because I'm going back and obviously like every draft is different. I know we talk about this behind the scenes, but even when modeling like what's going to happen, situations at the top and what quarterbacks are there and how deep the quarterback class is very much drives both our understanding of the draft and how confident we are in those first couple of selections. I think very much in this particular case this year does very much fit along the lines of like the Joe Burrow, the Trevor Lawrence years, and like the day of the draft for Joe Burrow, they took the number 1 overall pick down because it was such a lock basically, and it had already been announced. To me, I do think, again, if you're like line shopping a little bit, I think, DraftKings is closer to like 35-1 on 35 minus 3,500 on Caleb Williams right now. Like, I think you could maybe potentially find value. I don't see this changing whatsoever, with Caleb Williams pro day finishing up, obviously no red flags from there. Like, this is very much him as like kind of a proverbial lock for the number 1 overall pick. I think day of it really wouldn't change. I think like only thing that is really going to happen now is like the value loss and less time being consistent between where we are right now and when the draft actually happens. And there's a little bit of like uncertainty baked into that price right now. But to me, I think, yeah, I do agree with Rob in the sense that like there are maybe a few times where you would do it. And I think the draft in particular, this kind of year with Caleb Williams could definitely make sense based on your bankroll and how you kind of, approach and assign risk, especially this far out. But I would do it, I would say sooner rather than later, I think for sure.
Well, the only issue with doing it sooner and why Rob kind of does it right before the draft is you just don't want to donk $5,000 to win 100, for example.
Right.
And that you want to be able to have that as disposable there. I was on VSiN yesterday with Jared Smith and my friend Tim Murray. We were talking about the market, like the markets 4 years ago when we had the pandemic and everything, where there was no other sports on, they were much more vast. Like, we may not get great markets for this draft, Ben, and so that might be something for you, to your point about doing it earlier. Let's look at the number 2 overall pick. We have, Jaden Daniels has moved out to a pretty big favorite here. Not a huge, not minus 200 or so, but minus 180. Just a few weeks ago, he was plus 155 or so at this actual sports book. So we have seen some significant odds change here. I don't actually think that the reason for this is fundamental. I think that it's just a lot of people, trying to get news and trying to infer from things, and whether or not Drake May fits with Cliff Kingsbury, and whether or not Jaden Daniels is the same kind of quarterback as Marcus Mariota, and all this kind of stuff. I will say, and let me connect some dots, right? When John Lynch got the job in San Francisco, none of us knew he was even interviewing for the GM job in San Francisco. And one of the stipulations was that he did not, they did not leak it. He would not take the job. He would not leave the cushy media environment for a team that would leak stuff. And, Adam Peters spent the majority of his formative years in the front office in San Francisco. There have not been leaks out of Washington. This thing is moving on air. This is people moving the market based upon nothing, right? And this is just opinion. So I'll just say this: do not lay the negative price with Daniels. It might win. And I respect the market. I believe it's efficient-ish, especially this time. But you are not going to be a long-term winner in this game that is betting the draft if you lay this big price with Daniels in a situation like this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I do think just in general, like the draft and draft betting, obviously the NBA draft and those sorts of things are similar, but there's no actual sporting event that you are wagering on that is similar to how the draft is approached, from what moves some of these markets and why. And I'm very much in agreement in the sense that, we don't have concrete factual information that Washington is going to hang on to the number 2 pick, and they very much value Jaden Daniels, but that's what the market is kind of dictating for us right now. So I do think, all things considered, kind of like you said, laying it with Jaden Daniels right now is not the correct decision. I do think if you like Jaden Daniels, there will probably be a point in time here over the next month where these numbers do move back, because they are so volatile and because they move so much on perceived error in a lot of situations, that we are going to see this probably correct again at some point. To me, I think overall, though, the takeaway for me is it does seem more and more like that Washington hangs on to the number 2 overall selection, and it very much comes down to just what one of these 2 quarterbacks do they like internally before, and we're not going to know that, I would say, until they're on the clock coming up here in April.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is where you can get in some trouble, right? Because I do think that Washington could trade up to 1 because Cliff has the experience with Caleb. I do think the Bears have gotten high off the idea of trading the first pick. I do think that first pick creates its own environment, right? In terms of those top 5 picks, they don't follow a chart. The Bears were able to get $200 million in assets including DJ Moore, for the first pick last year from the Panthers. It is a huge, so I would just not necessarily, if they offered me a market on the Bears taking Caleb, I would not actually, I would not advise anybody taking that. I would not, I would buy tails on Washington. To Andrew's point, I would buy tails on Washington to possibly get Caleb. But as far as if you're just getting the pick slot, Caleb Williams is going first, right? And that seems to me to be the number one thing. I think Washington will not move back, because
that was my point. I don't think Washington's moving back. They could very much still move up, and I actually think that there actually might be some legitimate, things moving in that market that I'm completely speculating at this point. But yeah, my whole point was, I don't see Washington moving back.
And you're 100%. I think your read is 100% true here. If we look at the 3rd pick, this gets to Beat Gamer's question: do you think the Vikings trade before the draft, or do you think they just wait until the day of the draft to see what's there? I think Kwesi was not on the 2021 Niners when they made the trade for the third pick. He was on Cleveland at that point, but then he was. But we've seen the Jets move up to 3, the Niners move up to 3 around this time in the 2018 and 2021 drafts, respectively. And those were mistakes because the Jets went up for Baker Mayfield. The Niners went up for God knows who. Right. And I think Kwesi has a position now, 11 and 23, where he can wait. And this gets to where I think that there's a value here. So Drake May is the favorite at the third pick at -150. I actually like the better bets for May are to pick second or to fall. I think that JJ McCarthy at 17-2 here is actually the play because I do believe that people like McCarthy. I also believe that there is a cutoff. There has always been a cutoff after which quarterbacks just sink. Like, last year was Will Levis. Mac Jones was, the circa opened him at 3.5 draft position. He gets to 15. Jordan Love fell quite a bit in his draft. Drew Lock fell out of the first round. Deshaun Kaiser fell out of the first round. Mason Rudolph was the reason the prop was 5.5 quarterbacks in 2018. He fell to round 3, guys. Malik Willis, obviously. Desmond Ridder was better than even money because of draft Twitter and all the football hipsters liking him back in 2022. He fell all the way back to the third round. Like, I just don't I think that the fourth quarterback has a better chance. Let me throw this in your direction. I think the fourth quarterback has a better chance to fall than the top 4 guys go 1, 2, 3, 4.
So you think it's more likely that we don't see 4 quarterbacks go? You just have no idea who the fourth one that's actually going to fall is, basically, is your point.
Yeah.
You think one of JJ or Drake or maybe Jaden, probably not Jaden, but one of those 3 is going to fall past pick 4.
Like, I don't think that I like Nate Tice a lot. He's a very nice guy, and he has a lot of insight. He and Charles McDonald just had a draft, and I like Charles a lot. Charles is a very smart football mind. I don't think that they're plugged in, but I do think that they can see where the puck goes sometimes. And their latest mock draft, Drake May was not in the top 10 picks. Yeah. And Drake May is Nate Tice's favorite quarterback in this draft. Right. So somebody somewhere told them something. And whether or not that thing's true or false, and I don't know if Sam on our colleague is nervously laughing because we're talking about the markets here or whatever. But like, I think to me, it's more of, I just think that the last quarterback falls all the time, and Will Levis was the favorite to be the second overall pick on Wednesday of the draft last year.
Reddit was wrong.
And he falls to the second round. So, and it could be McCarthy. Like, I think if I were the Vikings, and I'm not, I would be going after the third pick and trying to get Drake May. That would be what I would be doing. The fourth pick for McCarthy feels like a downer, not only for them, but also for Arizona.
Right. Arizona.
So Arizona goes from getting Marvin Harrison possibly to now falling all the way out and probably sweating out whether or not they get Roma Dunza or somebody like that. I feel like that also makes that trade harder. I do think that fourth pick is going to have a ransom attached to it that's similar to the top 3 picks.
Exactly.
And if you're, and this is where Vikings Twitter really kind of pissed me off, and I do want to come back to this. They're like, I was very adamantly against the competitive rebuild. And they're like, oh, I was told by people like Eric Eager that if you competitively rebuild, you'll never get your franchise quarterback. It's like, yeah, you won 13 games and lost to Daniel Jones in the playoffs. And then you won 7 games. And now your fan base is excited about you trading 2 first-rounders to move up and get the 4th best quarterback in the draft. That is not exactly winning, in my opinion. I think that you want, so if I'm Kwesi, I say I go and get the 3rd quarterback, who in my opinion is actually the 2nd best quarterback, and that to me is more of a win. And right. I throw, and somebody talked about the 400 the 400 Jimmy Johnson. That's a rounding error if you get your start. Like the Chiefs don't give two flying bleeps about the
400 draft
cost to get Mahomes, right? Like it doesn't. And if like the Jets, no one remembers that the Jets traded Bobby Okereke for the chance that like Darnold sucks so bad it didn't matter what the price was. So it like I would just, if I were Minnesota, I'd convince New England that your team's not nearly good enough to draft Drake May, and I would try for the third pick. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, Sam knows I was nervously laughing at you suggesting J.J. McCarthy at 17-2 at the third overall pick was a good bet, because that would very much imply that the Vikings were moving up to 3 and selecting McCarthy over a guy like Drake May, which I think would put me on like the biggest tilt of my life. But just in general, I do think there's 2 points that you touched on that I'm in agreement with, and I think would absolutely shock me if they happen. One is the suggestion that Washington is going to move down or trade out of 2 and go further down, I think would absolutely shock me. And the same thing with Arizona. I think we talked about it really well last week, and I've kind of harped on this, but them moving out of that 4th pick, and you suggested it, like they're going to force a team to pay top 3 type acquisition, if not even a little bit more, to get that 4th pick, especially if it's to go up and get a quarterback. And I just don't see that developing. So to me, I'm with you with the Vikings. Like, it's getting to the New England Patriots pick at 3, or you're kind of busted. And then we go back to like the contingency plan of like seeing who's there at pick 11, or, maybe it's Michael Penix at like pick 23. That I think is kind of like,
we made a little bit of an error, I think. So you're probably giving up, Beat Gamer. And I don't have the Jimmy Johnson chart right in front of me. I know that 3 is going to cost more than 11 and 23. And the Jimmy Johnson chart is still even an underestimation for the top pick. All the analytical charts are drastic underestimations for the top 5 or so picks. That you bring up such a great point. For the Cardinals to trade out of 4, it has to be kind of like how the Cardinals traded out of 3 last year, which is a haul big enough so that when you trade back into the top 10 again to go get Marvin Harrison back, no one can really turn the screws to you except for the biggest dorks on the internet. Which of course I'm one of. This has been a lot of fun. I don't want to talk any. We have so many more Saturdays till the draft.
We do.
We have so many more markets to talk about. I don't want to talk about Panthers being plus 140 to take a wide receiver with pick 33. Much stuff. Like we don't even know the rapture could happen the day between the first round and the second round. We don't know what the Panthers are going to do. So I'm not even going to talk about that until we get actually into the month of April. I'm also excited to go back and watch the March Madness. I know Sam Brookhouse, one of our great data scientists who's been in the chat here, is also there. So is Ben. This has been a lot of fun. I can't wait to recap the owners' meetings. The owners' meetings, some of the people at Sumer will be there this week. I'm going to take a little bit of a vacation starting Wednesday, but we will still have the SumerSports 2024 Draft Show 7 p.m. Channel 88. It'll also rerun tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Friday show, again, on SiriusXM Channel 88. Thomas Dimitroff and I talk about the tight ends and the running backs in this year's draft. It was a lot of fun to talk about Brock Bowers. To tell Thomas what it was like to have your hand in the dirt at the Division II level, that was a good time. Ben, anything before we tell the great fans of SumerSports have a happy Saturday?
No, not much. I don't know. I was against you, basically. I know we talked about it off air, but I was leaning towards Gonzaga, but I don't even know. You didn't give another score update. But to me, I thought, the injury implications of what Kansas was going through were going to be too dramatic. So that might be a spot in the second half. We'll see where that one finishes, though, for sure. But no, it's been great. It's been fun. Check out everything at SumerSports.com because a lot of good stuff is coming up.
I hate when my bracket has a different pick than your bracket. My bracket having Kansas, yours having Gonzaga. I'm a big time, I'm not from the Pacific Northwest, but I'm a big fan of the Pacific Northwest. So I oftentimes will pick Gonzaga. I have some friends who are professors there that I went to grad school with. But I just felt like there was a little bit of a mispricing there. And so I liked Kansas in my bracket, but who knows? We have a whole second half. That's why they call it March Madness. Who cares the fact that Kansas is up 3 in the waning moments of the first half? Thank you all for coming. This has been really fun. We hope to have another show sometime next week or so. But with me going on vacation, you might just have to watch the class play with Sam Brookhouse, Ben Brown, Tage Seth, and also Stats and Schemes with Sean Syed and Tage Seth. Those podcasts I know for sure will be out this week. For Ben Brown, for Eric Eager, for producer Matt Stofsky, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.